There are thresholds in your life that you only recognize in retrospect. They aren't grand archways or ornate doors. They are quiet, unassuming moments that arrive disguised as something ordinary. A Tuesday evening, a shared silence, a knock on the door in the dead of night. Mine was a sound so soft it was almost a part of my dream, a gentle tapping that seemed to emanate from the very architecture of my own heart. It was the sound of a boundary dissolving, the quiet, insistent request for entry into a space I had kept locked for years. And when I finally understood what was happening, when I padded across the cold wooden floor of my apartment, the sound resolved itself into 3 distinct, hesitant knocks against the wood of my bedroom door. It was followed by a whisper, a single word that carried the entire weight of the world, the entire history of our friendship, and the terrifying, beautiful possibility of something more. My name, just my name, spoken by him, a ghost of a sound in the oppressive silence of 3 in the morning. He had knocked on my door. Liam, who occupied a space in my life so vast and foundational it felt like he was part of the load-bearing structure of my own identity, was standing on the other side of a thin plank of wood, asking to be let in. Not into the apartment. He was already inside, a familiar presence who had his own key, but into this final, private room. My bedroom. My sanctuary. The place where my thoughts of him were allowed to roam free, untethered by the careful performance of platonic friendship. The air in the room felt suddenly thin, and my own breathing was a loud, intrusive rhythm against the frantic drumming in my chest. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed a merciless red. 3:17 a.m. An hour for emergencies, for confessions, for the kind of raw, unfiltered honesty that the daylight would never permit. I knew, with a certainty that was both exhilarating and petrifying, that opening this door would change everything. The carefully constructed ecosystem of our friendship, a delicate balance of unspoken rules and comfortable distances, was about to be subjected to a seismic event. And I was the one whose hand was on the doorknob. Liam, I whispered back, my voice thick with sleep and a sudden, paralyzing anxiety. The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with years of things unsaid. I could almost feel his presence through the door, a warm, restless energy that I knew as well as my own. I pictured him standing there, his broad shoulders slumped, his hand likely running through his perpetually messy dark hair, a nervous habit I had catalogued along with 1,000 other tiny details. He was a constellation of small gestures, and I was the lonely astronomer who had spent years mapping him in secret. Julian, he said again, his voice closer this time, pressed against the wood. I can't sleep, and there it was. The pretext, the plausible deniability. It wasn't a declaration or a confession. It was a problem to be solved, a simple, practical issue that required a simple, practical solution. But we both knew, in that charged silence, that it was so much more than that. He couldn't sleep, and he had come to me. He had walked past the comfortable couch in the living room, a space that had become his unofficial second bed over the past few months. He had bypassed the spare blankets folded neatly in the hall closet. He had navigated the familiar darkness of my apartment, a path he could walk with his eyes closed, and stopped here, at my door. It was a choice, a deliberate and significant one, and every nerve ending in my body was screaming with the implications of it. I opened the door. We met in the autumn of our freshman year of college, 2 boys who felt like islands in the bustling archipelago of a new university. We were both on the rowing team, a sport that demands a punishing sort of harmony, a complete sublimation of the self into the rhythm of the whole. I was quiet, observant, more comfortable behind the lens of my camera than in the middle of a conversation. I saw the world in frames, in compositions of light and shadow, and I had learned early on that watching was safer than participating. Liam was the opposite, or so it seemed. He was all bright energy and easy laughter, the kind of person who collected friends like other people collected spare change. He moved through the world with a confidence that I found both intimidating and deeply magnetic. On the water, however, our differences dissolved. In the shell, all that mattered was the catch, the drive, the shared breath, the single, unified motion of pulling against the resistance of the water. He sat in front of me, his back a landscape of muscle and bone that I came to know with an almost scholarly intimacy. I learned the precise way his shoulders bunched before a power stroke, the rhythm of his breathing as we pushed past exhaustion. We found our synchronicity there, in the cold morning mist rising off the river, long before we ever found it in words. Our friendship was forged in those grueling early morning practices and cemented in the quiet exhaustion that followed. We'd sit in the dining hall, barely speaking, just shoveling down plates of food, a comfortable silence settling between us like a familiar blanket. I learned that his bright energy was a carefully constructed shield. Beneath it, there was a restlessness, a current of anxiety that he was constantly trying to outrun. He thought in code, in logical progressions, a software engineering major who saw the world as a series of problems to be debugged. But his own heart was a tangle of spaghetti code he couldn't seem to sort out. I, the quiet artist, the photographer who dealt in emotion and intuition, became his unlikely interpreter. He would talk for hours about code, about projects, about anything other than what was truly bothering him, and I would listen, catching the meaning in the spaces between his words, in the frantic tapping of his fingers on the table, in the way his gaze would drift towards the window. I fell in love with him gradually, then all at once. It wasn't a lightning strike. It was more like the slow, inexorable turning of a season. For a long time, I could pretend it was just deep friendship, an admiration for his spirit, a profound sense of connection. But then there were moments, small and seemingly insignificant, that would steal the air from my lungs. The time he fell asleep on my shoulder in the library, his head a heavy, trusting weight, his soft breathing a quiet rhythm against my neck. The afternoon he showed up at my dorm room with a new lens for my camera, a gift he'd saved up for because he'd overheard me lamenting that mine was broken, saying only, "The world looks better through your eyes. I want to see it too." Each of these moments was a photograph I stored in the darkroom of my mind, a perfect, painful image of what I wanted and could not have. Because from the very beginning, there was Sarah. Sarah was a constant, a fixed point in Liam's orbit. They had been high school sweethearts, and their relationship was a fact of life, as immutable as the sky. She was lovely and kind, and she fit into his life with an ease that I envied with a dull, persistent ache. I became their third wheel, the quiet, dependable friend. I was the one they called to help them move apartments, the one who took their smiling photos in the park, the one who listened to Liam's anxieties about their future. I played my part so well that I think I even convinced myself, most of the time. I built a fortress around my heart, its walls constructed of plausible deniability and the genuine, deep-seated fear of losing him. If he never knew, I could keep him. My friendship with Liam was the most important architecture in my life, and I would not be the one to test its foundations. So I watched and I waited, and I learned to live with the quiet hum of yearning that became the permanent soundtrack to my life. It was a lonely existence, being the sole keeper of such a significant secret, a truth that lived and breathed in the space between us, visible only to me. The shift began with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday in October, 3 years after we'd graduated. We lived in the same city now, our apartments a 20-minute walk apart, a distance we both traversed frequently. His voice on the phone was hollow, a pale imitation of its usual warmth. "She's gone," he said, and the two words landed with the dead weight of a final, irreversible decision. Sarah had left. It wasn't a fight, it was an ending. A quiet, sad unraveling that had been happening for months, hidden beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life. He explained it to me in clipped, emotionless sentences, as if he were reporting on a system crash. The logic of their life together had failed. The code was broken beyond repair. He didn't cry. He just sounded empty. "Can I come over?" he asked, his voice cracking on the last word, the first sign of the devastation lurking beneath his composed facade. "You don't have to ask," I said, already pulling on my shoes. When he arrived at my door, he looked like a ship that had been torn from its moorings, adrift in a storm he didn't know how to navigate. He was soaked from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes were what struck me. They were wide and lost, searching my face for some kind of anchor. I pulled him inside, into the warmth of my apartment, and he just stood there in the entryway, dripping onto the floor, his shoulders shaking. For a long time, he didn't speak. He just let me lead him to the couch, wrap a blanket around him, and place a warm mug of tea in his trembling hands. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the sound of the rain against the window panes and the quiet, shuddering breaths he was trying so hard to control. He was trying to process the end of a decade of his life, the dismantling of a future he had always taken for granted. And I, his friend, sat with him, my heart aching with a complicated mix of sympathy for his pain and a terrible, selfish spark of something that felt dangerously like hope. He talked for hours that night, the words finally spilling out of him in a torrent of confusion and grief. He wasn't just mourning Sarah. He was mourning the person he had been with her, the easy certainty of their shared path. He was confronting a loneliness that was vast and terrifying. "I don't know how to be alone," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper, his gaze fixed on the swirling steam rising from his mug. "Our entire apartment, it's a museum of us. Every corner holds a ghost." He looked at me then, his eyes pleading. Can I just stay here tonight? On the couch? I can't go back there." Not yet. It was the first crack in the foundation of our old dynamic. He was asking for a different kind of support, a physical presence to ward off the encroaching darkness. It was a request born of desperation, entirely platonic in its intent, and yet it felt like a door creaking open, a door I had long ago accepted would remain permanently sealed. "Of course," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Stay as long as you need." And so the ritual began. What started as one night bled into a week, and then a month. The couch in my living room became his. He'd arrive late, after a long day of work and a longer evening of trying to distract himself, his face etched with a bone-deep weariness. He'd brought over a pillow and a change of clothes, small artifacts of his new, fractured life taking up residence in my carefully ordered space. At first, it was a clear boundary. I would be in my bedroom. He would be on the couch. We were two separate entities under one roof, the geography of the apartment reinforcing the geography of our friendship. I would lie awake in my bed, listening to the sounds of him settling in for the night, the sigh as he laid down, the rustle of the blanket, the soft, rhythmic breathing that eventually signaled he had found some temporary peace. My apartment, once a quiet sanctuary of solitude, was now filled with his presence, his energy, his sadness. It was an agony and a comfort all at once. I was a cartographer of his grief, charting the subtle shifts in his mood, the nights he tossed and turned, the mornings he woke looking a little less broken than the day before. The living room, with its large, drafty window, became a sort of liminal space. It was neither his old home nor a new one. It was a temporary shelter from the storm of his life. I would often find him there in the mornings, staring out at the city waking up, a profound loneliness radiating from him. We developed a new domestic rhythm. I'd make coffee for two without thinking. We'd eat dinner together, sitting on the floor because my small dining table was covered in my photography equipment. We moved around each other with an unspoken understanding, a quiet dance of shared space. But the line was always there, invisible but deeply felt. The hallway between the living room and my bedroom was a border, a no-man's land we did not cross. At night, I would say goodnight at the threshold of my room, a quiet word exchanged across the distance, before closing the door and leaving him to his ghosts on the couch. Then, one night, the boundary began to blur. It was a particularly cold evening in late November, the kind of damp chill that seeps into your bones. I was already in bed, reading, when I heard him get up from the couch. I heard his footsteps pad softly down the hall, and my heart seized, thinking he was going to the bathroom. But he stopped outside my door. For a long moment, there was only silence. I held my breath, listening. Then, a soft knock, the same hesitant sound that would, months later, become the turning point of my entire life. I opened the door to find him standing there, wrapped in the thin blanket from the couch, shivering slightly. "It's freezing out there," he said, his voice a low murmur. "And the couch, it's killing my back. Do you think, would it be weird if I just slept on the floor in here? It's warmer." Every rational thought in my head screamed at me to say no, to preserve the boundary, to protect myself. But looking at him, at the genuine misery in his eyes, at the way he seemed to be physically shrinking from the cold and the loneliness, I couldn't. My desire to comfort him overrode my instinct for self-preservation. "Don't be an idiot, Liam. Don't sleep on the floor." I pulled back the covers on the far side of my queen-sized bed. "Just stay on your side." The words were meant to be a joke, a way to lighten the immense, sudden tension in the air, but they came out sounding fragile and thin. He looked from the bed to my face, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, before giving me a small, grateful nod. He walked over to the other side of the bed and slid under the covers, his movements careful and deliberate, as if he were handling something incredibly fragile, which I supposed he was. That first night was a study in exquisite torture. The bed, which had always felt spacious, now seemed impossibly small. I was acutely aware of every inch of him, the warmth radiating from his body across the small gulf of mattress between us, the sound of his breathing, deeper and closer than it had ever been before. I lay ramrod straight, my muscles coiled with tension, staring up at the ceiling and mapping the constellations of shadow cast by the streetlights outside. I was terrified to move, terrified to breathe too loudly, terrified that the frantic, thunderous beating of my own heart would be audible in the quiet room. Liam, however, seemed to find the comfort he was looking for almost instantly. His restless energy subsided, and within minutes, his breathing evened out into the slow, deep rhythm of sleep. He had found his anchor, and I was the one being tossed in the storm. This became the new ritual. The couch was abandoned. The pretext of the cold or his sore back was eventually dropped, left unspoken between us. It was simply the new reality. Every night, he would end up in my bed. We never spoke of it in the daylight. In the morning, we would get up and make coffee and talk about work or the weather, as if we hadn't just spent 8 hours sharing the most intimate of spaces, our bodies separated by a few inches of cotton sheet. The nights were a secret we kept from the day. The space between us and the bed became a territory I navigated with painstaking care. Some nights, it was a vast, cold desert. On others, it was a shrinking landscape. He was a restless sleeper, and sometimes, in the depths of the night, he would shift, an arm brushing against mine, a leg tangling with my own. Each accidental touch was a jolt of electricity, a shock to my carefully guarded system. I would freeze, my breath catching in my throat, waiting for him to pull away. But he never did. He would just settle into the new position, murmuring in his sleep, completely unaware of the chaos he was causing inside of me. The door to my bedroom, once a firm boundary, now held a new, symbolic weight. I started leaving it slightly ajar at night. It was my own piece of plausible deniability, a silent invitation. It said, "This is not a locked room. This is not a deliberate choice. This is just a place you can come if you need to." It was a lie, of course. It was the most deliberate choice I made every single day. The open door was a testament to my own cowardice and my own desperate hope. It was a concession that I was willing to live in this ambiguous, painful space forever if it meant I could keep him close. I was living in a constant state of low-grade anxiety, a hum of tension that vibrated just beneath my skin. I was a photographer obsessed with a single subject, developing the same image over and over in the darkroom of my mind, searching for a truth I was too afraid to expose to the light. I watched him sleep, the lines of stress on his face smoothed away by unconsciousness, his guard finally down. In those quiet, pre-dawn hours, he was just Liam. Not Sarah's ex, not the brilliant coder, just a man who felt safe enough to be vulnerable. And he had chosen to be vulnerable with me. The weight of that trust was a heavy, precious thing. It was a gift I didn't know how to hold, and I was terrified I was going to drop it. The inches between us continued to shrink. It happened by millimeters, an unconscious migration in the night. One morning, I woke up to find his hand resting on the pillow next to my head, his fingers inches from my face. Another time, I woke with my back pressed against his. The warmth of his body, a solid, comforting presence that felt both alien and deeply, fundamentally right. The most significant shift came during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of my apartment. Liam had always hated them. He'd confessed it to me once, years ago, a moment of unexpected vulnerability. He wasn't afraid of the noise, but of the sudden, violent lack of control, the way the sky could just break open without warning. The first clap of thunder woke me, and I felt him tense beside me. In the next flash of lightning, I saw that his eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. Without thinking, without allowing my overanalytical brain to intervene, I shifted closer and put my arm over his chest, a simple, grounding gesture. "It's okay," I murmured into the darkness. "It's just a storm," he didn't pull away. Instead, he let out a long, shuddering breath and turned onto his side, facing me, tucking himself into the curve of my body. My arm was now wrapped around him, my hand resting on his shoulder. His head was on my chest, his breath warming the fabric of my t-shirt. My heart was a frantic drum against his ear, and I was certain he could feel it, certain he would understand its frantic, desperate message. But he just lay there, his body finally relaxing, melting against mine. He had sought refuge, and I had given it. The line had been crossed, not with a conversation or a decision, but with a clap of thunder and an instinctive reach in the dark. We fell asleep like that, tangled together, two bodies that had finally found their natural resting place. The ambiguity was no longer a space between us. It was the very air we were breathing. It was both a sanctuary and a cage, and I was no longer sure I could tell the difference. The crossing finally came on a Thursday night that felt no different from any other. The ritual had become so ingrained that it had lost its initial, heart-stopping tension and settled into a kind of chronic, low-grade ache. He came home from work looking exhausted, the shadows under his eyes deeper than usual. A major project at his company was imploding, and he was at the center of the frantic effort to salvage it. We ate takeout in comfortable silence, and I watched him push food around his plate, his mind clearly a million miles away, lost in lines of failing code. Later, as we lay in bed, the silence felt different. It wasn't comfortable. It was taut, stretched thin with an unspoken tension that was new, or perhaps just newly acknowledged. He was restless, shifting every few minutes, the mattress a small boat being tossed on the waves of his anxiety. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, giving him space. I could feel his restlessness as if it were my own, a frantic energy buzzing in the space between us. I wanted to reach out, to offer the same comfort I had during the thunderstorm, but something held me back. That night had felt like an exception, a moment of crisis. This felt different. This felt like it was about us. Finally, his movement stilled. The silence that fell was absolute, so profound that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I thought he had finally fallen asleep. "Julian." His voice was a whisper, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. It was stripped bare of everything but a raw, terrifying vulnerability. My own voice was tight, a knot in my throat. "Yeah." He rolled onto his side to face me. I could feel his gaze on me in the darkness, and I slowly turned to meet it. In the faint light filtering in from the street, I could just make out the shape of his face, his eyes wide and searching. He was so close. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. The air crackled. This was it. This was the precipice. The moment where the path diverges, and you have to choose a direction, knowing you can never go back. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and my stomach plummeted. Sorry for what? For being here? For needing me? For everything I had secretly hoped this was becoming? For what? I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. "For this," he said, a vague gesture to the space we occupied, to the bed, to the entire tangled mess of our situation. "For leaning on you so much. For making everything so confusing." He paused, and the silence stretched for an eternity. "I don't know what I'm doing, Julian. My whole life feels like I'm running on corrupted code. Nothing works the way it's supposed to. Except this," his voice dropped even lower. "Except being here. With you. It's the only thing that feels stable. The only thing that lets me breathe, my heart, which I thought could not possibly beat any faster, found a new, frantic rhythm. He was giving me an opening, a doorway into the labyrinth of his own confusion. And for the first time, I felt a surge of courage, a desperate need to stop observing and finally act. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and rested my fingers against his cheek. His skin was warm. He leaned into my touch, his eyes fluttering closed for a second, a silent surrender. "It's not confusing to me, Liam," I said, the words a truth I had held captive for a decade. His eyes opened, and they were shining with something I couldn't name. It looked like fear. It looked like hope. It looked like a question he was terrified to ask. So I waited. I let the silence be his to fill. I had spent years watching, interpreting, guessing. Now, I needed him to speak. He swallowed hard. His own hand came up to cover mine, pressing my palm more firmly against his face. "Would it be okay?" he whispered, his voice breaking on the last word. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The question hung in the air between us, a fragile, beautiful thing. He wasn't assuming. He wasn't taking. He was asking. He was offering me a choice, giving me all the power in a dynamic where I had always felt I had none. It was the most profound gesture of respect and care he could have possibly made. And in that moment, the years of fear, of self-imposed caution, of quiet, lonely yearning, they all just dissolved. All that was left was the simple, overwhelming truth. "Yes," I breathed. "Yes, Liam. It would be okay." He moved slowly, tentatively, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't. I met him halfway. The first touch of his lips to mine was impossibly soft, a question more than a statement. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand. It was a kiss of confession. It tasted of uncertainty and a deep, aching loneliness that I recognized as my own. It was a quiet, careful exploration, a mapping of new territory. I felt a single tear escape my eye and trace a path down my temple, a release of a decade of stored-up emotion. He kissed it away gently before his lips found mine again, this time with a little more certainty, a little more warmth. It was the feeling of a door, long sealed shut, finally swinging open. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock. It was the feeling of coming home to a place I hadn't even known I was searching for. The aftermath began not with a bang, but with a suffocating silence. The morning light that streamed through my window felt harsh and interrogating, exposing the fragile, new thing that had been born in the darkness. I woke up first. Liam was still asleep, his body curled away from me, a clear and deliberate distance re-established between us. The space he had put back felt like a chasm, a desolate landscape carved out by the anxieties of the daylight. The memory of the kiss, of his vulnerability, felt like a dream, hazy and unreal. But the ghost of his lips on mine was a tangible presence, a warm imprint that I could still feel. I lay there for what felt like hours, watching him, my mind a chaotic whirl of hope and dread. I was a developer staring at a single, perfect frame, terrified that the rest of the film would be blank. When he finally stirred, he didn't turn towards me. He sat up slowly, his back to me, and ran a hand through his hair. The gesture, usually so familiar and comforting, now seemed fraught with a new, terrible significance. He was building a wall, brick by silent brick. I have to get to work early," he mumbled, not looking at me. He swung his legs out of bed and stood up, pulling on the clothes he'd left on the floor the night before. His movements were jerky, unnatural. He was a stranger in my room, a ghost who had overstayed his welcome. "Liam," I said, my voice quiet. I just wanted him to look at me, to give me some sign that last night was real, that it meant something. He froze for a second, his hand on the doorknob. He turned his head slightly, his profile etched against the morning light, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'll text you later," he said, and then he was gone. The soft click of the bedroom door closing, followed by the louder, more final sound of the front door shutting, echoed in the sudden, crushing emptiness of the apartment. I was alone again, but this new loneliness was 1,000 times heavier than the old one. The old loneliness was a passive state, a quiet ache of what could not be. This was an active, gaping wound, The pain of something beautiful being offered and then immediately snatched away. I had spent the night thinking a door had opened, only to wake up and find myself in a room with no windows, no exits, just the suffocating certainty that I had misinterpreted everything. I had ruined the most important friendship of my life for a moment of hope. The promised text never came. My phone remained silent on the nightstand, a black mirror reflecting my own anxious face. The hours crawled by, each one a fresh wave of panic and regret. I replayed the kiss, the conversation, his whispered question, over and over in my mind, searching for the flaw in my interpretation, the moment where I went wrong. Had I imagined the tenderness? Had it just been a moment of grief-fueled confusion for him, a desperate reach for any port in a storm? The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. I had been his safe harbor, and I had tried to turn it into something else, something he clearly wasn't ready for, or worse, didn't want. The quiet intimacy of my apartment, once a comfort, now felt like a stage set for a tragedy. His pillow was still on my bed. His coffee mug was still by the sink. His presence lingered everywhere, a constant, painful reminder of what I had just lost. By the third day of silence, the anxiety had curdled into a cold, hard knot of anger and hurt. I was angry at him for his cowardice, for leaving me in this agonizing limbo. But mostly, I was angry at myself for allowing a decade of carefully constructed walls to be torn down by a single, whispered question. I had let myself hope, and the universe had punished me for it. I knew I couldn't continue like this. The ambiguity that I had once been able to tolerate was now an unbearable poison. I needed to know. Even if the truth was the worst thing I could imagine, it would be better than this suffocating silence. I needed to see him, to force the conversation he was so clearly avoiding. I sent him a single, simple text message, my fingers trembling as I typed. We need to talk. My place. Tonight. The three small dots that appeared almost instantly, indicating he was typing, made my heart leap into my throat. They appeared and disappeared several times before a reply finally came through. Okay, just one word. Not an apology, not an explanation. Just a reluctant agreement. I spent the rest of the day in a state of suspended dread, cleaning my apartment with a frantic energy, as if by ordering my physical space I could somehow order the chaos in my own head. I was preparing for a confrontation, bracing for the impact of losing him for good. The quiet observer was finally going to have to step into the frame, to demand to be seen, and the thought was utterly terrifying. He arrived at precisely 7 o'clock, his punctuality a strange, formal courtesy that only heightened the tension. When I opened the door, he looked even worse than he had the morning he'd left. He was pale, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He wouldn't meet my gaze, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. He walked into the living room and stood awkwardly in the center of it, as if he no longer knew his place here. The room felt charged, the air thick with everything we weren't saying. I closed the door and leaned against it, my arms crossed over my chest. So, I started, my voice colder than I intended. Are you going to say anything, or are we just going to stand here? Liam finally looked at me, and the raw panic in his eyes almost broke my resolve. He looked like a cornered animal. Julian, I'm so sorry, he whispered. Sorry for what, exactly? I pressed, refusing to let him off the hook with a vague apology. Sorry for kissing me? Or sorry for running away like a coward and ignoring me for 3 days? He flinched, the words landing like physical blows. Both, he admitted, his voice cracking. I panicked. I woke up, and it was all too real. And it scared the hell out of me. Scared you? I took a step towards him, my anger and hurt warring with the deep, instinctual need to comfort him. What about me, Liam? Do you have any idea what these last few days have been like? I thought I'd ruined everything. I thought I'd lost my best friend because I let myself believe that you might feel something. I do. He burst out, the words raw and desperate. That's what scares me. I do feel something, Julian. I don't know what it is. It's not logical. It doesn't fit into any framework I understand. I've spent my whole life on a set path. With Sarah, with my career, everything was planned out. Everything made sense. And then she left, and my whole world fell apart. And You were the only thing that was solid. The only thing that made sense. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Lying next to you at night. It was the first time in months I felt safe. The first time I didn't feel like I was completely alone. And that feeling, it started to become something else. Something more. I started needing it. Needing you. He was finally being honest, the words tumbling out of him in a messy, confused confession. He paced the small living room, running his hands through his hair, the physical manifestation of his internal chaos. That night, he continued, his voice dropping, when I kissed you, it was the most honest thing I've done in years. It felt right. More right than anything has felt in a very long time. And that's what terrified me. Because what if it's real? What does that mean? Who am I, if this is who I am? I looked at you in the morning, sleeping, and all I could think was that I was going to ruin you too. That I was just a broken, confused mess, and I was going to pull you down with me. So I ran. It was a stupid, cowardly thing to do. And I'm so sorry that I hurt you. He stopped pacing and stood before me, his eyes pleading, his defenses finally, completely down. He wasn't the confident, easygoing Liam I first met, or the broken, grieving man who showed up at my door months ago. This was someone new, someone stripped down to his very core, lost and afraid, but fighting to be honest. All my anger dissipated, replaced by a wave of overwhelming tenderness. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified of his own feelings. He was a man whose entire life had been built on logic, trying to solve the beautiful, illogical equation of the human heart. And he was scared he would get it wrong. The resolution did not arrive like a sudden sunrise, but like the slow, gentle dawn that follows a long, dark night. It came in the quiet that settled after his confession, in the space where all the fear and confusion had finally been laid bare. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not the unknowing initiator who had stumbled into my life and turned it upside down, but just Liam, my best friend, who was lost and scared and trying his best to navigate a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. I saw the man who knew my coffee order by heart, who remembered the name of my childhood dog, who had once driven 3 hours in a snowstorm to help me fix a flat tire. The architecture of our friendship was still there, strong and deep. It hadn't been destroyed. It was just changing, evolving into something new. I closed the distance between us and gently took his hands in mine. They were cold and trembling. You don't have to have it all figured out, I said softly, my voice losing its hard edge. I don't. This is new for me, too. In a way, I gave him a small, sad smile. The feelings aren't new. I've had those for a very long time. But this is new. And it's okay to be scared. I'm scared too. I'm scared of getting it wrong, of messing this up. I squeezed his hands. But I'm more scared of losing you. And the silence of the last 3 days was so much worse than any truth you could have told me. He looked down at our joined hands, a flicker of wonder in his eyes, as if he were seeing them for the first time. You felt this way for a long time? He asked, his voice full of a quiet awe. I nodded, the confession feeling less like a risk and more like a simple statement of fact. Since a cold morning on the river in our freshman year. I think a slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile I had seen in days. It didn't quite reach his eyes, but it was a start. It was a flicker of light in the darkness. You hit it well, he said, a hint of his old self in his voice. I'm a quiet observer, I replied. It's what I do. He met my gaze then, and the panic was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant sincerity. I don't want you to just be an observer anymore, Julian. I want to figure this out. With you. If you'll let me. If you're willing to be patient with me while I sort through my own messed up code. I've been patient for 10 years, Liam, I said gently. I think I can manage a little longer. That night. For the first time, we made a conscious choice. There was no pretext, no plausible deniability. When it was time for bed, I walked to my room, and he followed. I got into my side of the bed, and he got into his. But this time, when he turned to face me, it wasn't with restlessness or anxiety, but with clear, quiet intention. He reached for my hand under the covers, his fingers lacing through mine, a firm, grounding pressure. It was a simple gesture, but it was an anchor in the shifting tides of our new reality. It was a promise. And as I lay there, his hand in mine, the familiar warmth of his body next to me, I looked at the bedroom door. For months, it had been a symbol of my own hope and fear, left carefully ajar, an invitation into ambiguity. I thought about getting up, about walking over and clicking it shut, a definitive act to signify this new beginning. But I didn't need to. The door was just a door. The real threshold had already been crossed. The sanctuary was no longer the room itself, but the space we were building together, right here, in the quiet darkness. The boundary was no longer a physical barrier, but a shared understanding, a mutual agreement to be careful and kind with each other's hearts. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we'd learned to create together. The new normal was a quiet thing. It was mornings spent making coffee, our hands brushing as we reached for the same cupboard. It was evenings on the couch, my head resting on his shoulder, his arms securely around me, as we watched a movie. It was the slow, deliberate process of him moving his life into mine, not out of desperation, but out of choice. A toothbrush in the holder, a box of his books on my shelf, small, quiet claims on a shared future. The kiss was no longer a singular, terrifying event, but a new language we were learning to speak, soft, questioning kisses goodnight, gentle kisses goodbye in the morning. Each one was a reaffirmation, a line of code in the new program we were writing for our lives, one that was messy and complicated, but ultimately ours. We learned that a home isn't just a set of walls or a roof over your head. Sometimes it's the safe, quiet space you find in the arms of another person, the feeling of their hand in yours in the middle of the night, a silent promise that you are no longer sleeping alone.